Hello, today I wanted to go ahead and do my Frost DK beginner's guide for the Shadowlands pre-patch. This one has been a long time coming. I've spent a lot of time on the pre-patch testing and trying out different things to make sure that I could bring you guys the best information possible. The pre-patch is finally launching this Tuesday, so I felt like it was a perfect time to go ahead and get you guys all of this information all in one place. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. But first, a word from our sponsor, my DK Discord community, where myself, my friends, and all of you come together to discuss everything going on with DKs, Theorycraft, and we discuss Shadowlands. You can find lots of DK resources and a large community to answer your questions and share ideas with. Join us by clicking the link in the description down below or copy pasting it into your Discord desktop app. See you there. So first, let's start this off with a current state of Frost DK in the pre-patch. So pretty much what you need to know is that we are doing really well. Death Knight is in a really strong position in the pre-patch, and it's going to be an even stronger class in the Shadowlands. Now, we aren't as strong as we will be in the Shadowlands, and this is mostly because of a few abilities that we will actually get while we're leveling up in the Shadowlands. One of these abilities is Sacrificial Pact, which allows us to heal ourselves by sacrificing our ghoul. This doesn't become available until level 54. This is a very important one for our defenses, and this is one of the reasons why I'll recommend Death Pact to you guys a little bit later on. Another one is Obliterate rank 2, which we will unlock, I believe, at level 56, and that will give us a little bit more damage, about 10% more damage on our Obliterate. And finally is at level 58, we get Killing Machine rank 2, which makes our Obliterates scale with our mastery because they do frost damage. This is huge, and all this together ultimately is what makes us not be quite as good as we should be in the pre-patch, or maybe as we could be. Ultimately, we are scaled, we are tuned around having these abilities. There's not some kind of special pre-patch tuning, and then once we go into Shadowlands, we hit the Shadowlands tuning. No, we are tuned to have these abilities. It is a bit obvious, but don't worry, we are still doing just fine. We are still very competitive in duels and in PvP, and we are very, very competitive in PvE as well. Now let's talk a little bit about dual wield versus two-hand Frost DK. The difference is very noticeable. It is not a cosmetic option. I repeat, it is not a cosmetic option. It is very important. Not only does it change the allocation of where your damage actually comes from, coming from Obliterate versus Frost Strike or other frost damage sources, but it changes your playstyle. It changes a lot of different things. And I've made a full video, and I'll go ahead and have that up here, and I'll also have it linked in the description down below, where I go fully in depth to all the differences and basically which one you might want to choose and why. But the TLDR is that right now, two-hand is outperforming dual wield across the board in every aspect of gameplay and every kind of content type. There's only one dual wield Frost build that even competes, and it is about 2% lower than the two-hand equivalent to that build. So if you are looking just to do the biggest amount of damage possible and you don't care which one you play, then two-hand is definitely what you want to go. If you do want to play dual wield, then you're going to have to probably end up playing a Breath of Sindragosa build. So if you don't like that, then you're also going to want to go two-hand. But if you really like dual wield, if you really like Breath of Sindragosa, then that is still a very viable option. It's just going to perform just a couple of percent lower in PvE versus two-hand. Now in PvP, two-hand is really the only way to go. You will notice a big difference, and although I totally would say go do what makes you happy, if you want to play a dual wield in PvP, do it. You're not going to be like the worst thing ever, but two-hand is going to have a little bit of an advantage. Now let's go ahead and talk about Runeforges. Runeforges are pretty much unchanged from where they used to be. You're going to be wanting to run Fallen Crusader as a two-hand Frost DK all the time, and as a dual wield Frost DK, you're going to want to run some combination of either Fallen Crusader and Razor Ice or Hysteria and Razor Ice. I'm not really sure which one would be best. I haven't done a ton of testing with dual wield to really find that out, and I apologize for that, but I suggest that you try it out yourself and see which one. But ultimately, I don't think you can go wrong with choosing Fallen Crusader and Razor Ice on your dual wield weapons. Some of you may have been watching my other videos or other videos by other Frost DK creators, and you might be wondering about weapon swapping. Well, in this most recent PTR and beta build, they completely took weapon swapping out back like Old Yeller and finished it off. There is now a 30-second debuff that will come into effect when you swap weapons, and this will cause your Runeforges to not activate for 30 seconds after you have recently swapped to it. This completely makes weapon swapping in combat awful. Don't do it, just delete the macros, it's no longer a viable option. However, you still may want to consider swapping before battles, swapping between battles, in order to make sure you have the best setup possible. And if you want to learn more about the Runeforges, what they do, and what situations or specs or builds that you may want to use them in, I highly suggest you go and watch my Runeforge guide. Once again, it's right up here in the corner, but it's also linked in the description down below. Up next is our rotation. Our rotation is deceptively simple. A lot of people like to meme on it, but there's actually a lot of depth to it, and if you do it wrong, it will absolutely ruin your damage. Once again, I also have a video completely dedicated to this, going in depth on everything you may want to know, so if you want to learn more, it's right up here and it's also in the description down below. However, for the TLDR version, basically runes equals runic power. If you spend runes, then you're building runic powers. Spending runic power builds runes. This is a very nuanced, very important thing to understand about how Death Knights work fundamentally. So, for a Frost DK, what this means is that we have Obliterate, which spends 2 runes, and we have Frost Strike, which spends 25 runic power. You want to use your Obliterate as your primary ability. However, you want to be weaving your Frost Strikes in between them in order to get the most rune regeneration possible over a period of time, the most consistent rune regeneration possible, and this will give you a more consistent DPS. This will also reduce the amount of dead zones you have in your rotation. If you're having longer than 3 to 4 second long dead zones and are happening more frequently than about a minute, like once per minute, then I would say that you have a lot more work left to do. I suggest you watch my video, and I suggest you find a target dummy and you practice, because you really shouldn't be coming up against longer than 3 to 4 second dead zones at more than like once a minute. I very rarely come across them myself, and when I do, I always know it's because I made a mistake. Just try and imagine in a perfect world, if everything worked perfectly, there would be no dead zones. So if you have dead zones and something went wrong somewhere, little dead zones, no big deal, but if they're bothering you, then they're a problem, and you can fix that. As for our Remorseless Winter, I use this on cooldown. It is a very important ability that adds a little bit of extra damage. It doesn't hit as hard as it did in BFA, but is still a worthwhile ability, and I highly suggest you just push that button on cooldown. As for our Howling Blast, we don't want to use this without a rhyme proc, and a rhyme proc is that little proc color thing above your head. A proc is essentially whenever an ability gets a randomly activated power or extra ability to it. For Howling Blast, what this does is it makes it to where it costs no runes. So Howling Blast is something that is really great to fill in those dead zones with. It's another damage source and is easily weaved into your rotation. You want to use these procs on cooldown 100% of the time, and you don't want to waste these procs, and the way you do that is by spending them as fast as you can as soon as you get it, because you can't accumulate procs. If you have a proc of Rhyme and you don't spend it, then every other proc of Rhyme that could have happened is going out the door. So you want to spend that proc as fast as possible to make room for the next proc. And speaking of procs, we couldn't do this without talking about Killing Machine. When your auto attacks critically hit, then they have a chance to give you Killing Machine. Killing Machine causes your next Obliterate to be a guaranteed crit. This is what Frost lives and dies on. You want to be using these procs as fast as possible, once again, to make room for the next proc that could potentially come up, and your Killing Machine procs are going to be the main source of your damage, especially if you're a 2-hand Frost DK. Once again, that is a very, very TLDR version of it. If you would like much more information, much more in depth, then go check out that video linked in the description down below. For this next section, I wanted to go ahead and hop in game, and we're going to go over a couple of different talent builds for Frost DK. So this first build is going to be my personal primary build, and this is the 2-hand Frost DK Big Obliterate PvP build. So this build looks like this. Our first talent is Inexorable Assault. This one is the one you're going to be picking most of the time as a Frost DK. Icy Talons is a trap. It does not work for crap for a 2-hand Frost DK. The melee attack speed's not noticeable. You can literally run tests. I've done plenty of it. There is a very noticeable damage loss when taking Icy Talons versus an Oxypal Assault. You do not get more killing machine procs, you do not get any bonus to this. It is a complete and total trap. For our level 25 row, I'm running Murderous Efficiency. Now this is a very interesting row, and there's a similar conundrum going on with a row down below that we'll talk about a little later, but basically your only two real choices on this row is Murderous Efficiency and Runic Attenuation. Horn of Winter's cooldown is too long, you notice too big of a consistent damage loss, and so Horn of the Winter is not a viable option for any build or spec right now. It can be a niche choice option, but you really do notice a huge loss in your overall consistent DPS, and this is not good. So when it comes to Runic Attenuation and Murderous Efficiency and Runic Attenuation ultimately offer you the exact same damage. The main difference here, if it's not in DPS, the main difference is feel. So with a Murderous Efficiency build, what you notice is you get more consistent access to obliterates when you want them and when you need them. This is huge, especially for two-hand Frost DK. What you notice with Runic Attenuation is that you have a lot more runic power to play with. This is great for getting more Frost Strikes, this is great for getting more Death Strikes, this is great for more defensive and more healing. I suggest that you run Murderous Efficiency. However, Runic Attenuation is a very strong and very viable option, and ultimately, like I said, you will not see a big DPS difference. It is within 2%. I consider that margin for error, and I don't consider that a big deal. Maybe that is a big deal to you, but that is my personal take on it. So I recommend Murderous Efficiency so you have more access to obliterates. This makes the two-hand playstyle feel smoother, whereas this one makes the dual wield playstyle feel smoother. So moving on, you can choose Asphyxiate or Blinding Sleet. Death's Reach is fun, especially for questing. I like using this one a lot for questing just to be able to grip over and over and over and over and over again. But Asphyxiate's perfect for PvP because you're able to shut down people, you're able to stun kill targets and do a lot of damage. Our Asphyxiate is not a super strong stun. Usually our teammates in Arena, for example, are going to be running much better, much longer stuns, so they're stunning the off targets while I'm stunning the kill targets. Asphyxiate's perfect for this. Blinding Sleet is also a very strong option. You're able to actually disorient the entire enemy team in one button. That is very powerful. It can help you line up good chill streaks, but in Shadowlands, it doesn't really apply to the pre-patch, but in Shadowlands, there are other options to kind of do this for you, other avenues, other routes. So I'm highly recommending Asphyxiate. For our level 35 row, this is the other row where I told you we had a similar problem to the Runic Attenuation / Murderous Efficiency pick. Avalanche and Frozen Pulse perform very similar to each other, but in very different ways. It comes down to not one stronger than the other, but they have different allocation of damage. Avalanche is a very front-loaded choice. This means that in the beginning of the battle, you're going to do more damage in your opener, and then over time, it will average out, and Avalanche's damage will begin to fall. With Frozen Pulse, you come out of the gates kind of weak, but over time your damage adds on top of each other. So over time, Frozen Pulse does more damage. Avalanche does more damage in the short term, Frozen Pulse does more damage in the long term. For our level 40 row, I highly suggest Death Pact. This is the main pick that you were going to want for PvP because it kind of fills in that spot that we're missing from Sacrificial Pact. On top of that, Permafrost just doesn't do a whole lot for two-handed Frost. It just isn't that good. Our auto attack speed is so low. It really makes a very, very small difference. Death Pact is huge. It allows us to heal ourselves without losing any offensive pressure, and that is something that Death Knight needs badly. Down in the level 45 row, you actually have two choices here that are really strong, and that's Hypothermic Presence and Glacial Advance. Glacial Advance is powerful for applying Razor Eyes stacks, and once you get that up to 5 stacks, then you do 15% increased magic damage. This is extremely powerful even in the pre-patch because of just 15% more frost damage. It's great. Now it does have a little bit of a build-up time, and that's not super wonderful, and you'll definitely feel that build-up time, especially in duels and in PvP where things are a little bit faster paced. However, in PvE especially, this is just extremely strong, and once you do get those 5 stacks up on your target in PvP, it is insanely powerful and will definitely make a big noticeable difference to your damage. Hypothermic Presence is an insanely powerful ability as well. This ability plays really well into our defensive strengths, and what it basically does is it reduces the runic power cost of our abilities by 35%. What I use this for is I macro it directly into my Transfusion, which is a PvP honor talent right here. or I'll macro it right into my Lichborn so that I can actually get more death coils, more death strikes out in a shorter amount of time during those windows, and this will heal me for a tremendous amount of my health. With Lichborn, you can easily heal yourself for about 110% of your maximum HP, so a full health heal just by using Hypothermic Presence with it. This is absolutely massive, and it depends on your gear, what playstyle you're going for, what kind of content you're participating in, to determine which of these two you should pick. For our final row, I highly recommend Obliteration, especially for you two-hand Frost DKs. It allows us to get a ton of Killing Machine procs during our burst window and really hits hard. It is extremely powerful. Icecap is another similarly powerful ability. However, it will be getting nerfed quite severely when the Shadowlands actually comes out because we'll be losing our Azerite traits. But for the pre-patch, it still does have its place in the meta, but it is not as powerful as Obliteration for us two-handers. For dual wielders though, Icecap is a lot more compelling. Now let's talk about my two-hand dungeon build. This one is pretty powerful, honestly, and it's great because it has nothing to do with Breath of Sindragosa. All we do to activate this build is we just go from Avalanche to Frost Scythe. What this build looks like in practice is you are completely replacing your Obliterate with Frost Scythe whenever you're hitting more than 2 targets. If there are 3 targets in front of you, you Frost Scythe, always. You just don't hit Obliterate otherwise. You only hit Obliterate on 1 or 2 targets. So this is going to give you a lot more damage, especially paired with Glacial Advance when it comes to PvE in dungeons and raids. This is huge. It is much better than Breath of Sindragosa. It performs wildly better, and this is what you're going to want to be running. Now, there is an argument for going Runic Attenuation. However, I still suggest going Murderous Efficiency just because Frost Scythe still costs runes, and it pretty much takes the place of Obliterate. And since this is still a very heavy rune spending build, then we want to have as many runes as we can possibly have, and that's my logic behind why I run my build this way. This is what I recommend to run for a dual wield PvE kind of build. We're running an Inexorable Assault, we're running Runic Attenuation, Blinding Sleet, Frozen Pulse, Death Pact, Hypothermic, and Breath of Sindragosa. In this case, Hypothermic is being paired with your Breath of Sindragosa. The Runic Attenuation is going to give you more runic power to feed that Breath of Sindragosa. It scales with your auto attack speed, so this means a dual wield is just going to be sitting pretty with tons and tons of runic power. And Frozen Pulse scales with your weapon attack speed as well, so you'll do a lot of damage with that as well. Frost Scythe also isn't a bad option here, but I don't suggest running both Frost Scythe and Breath of Sindragosa. It can become just like a little too much. Once again, by the way, Icecap is still a very viable option for dual wield, so you really have a lot of room to just play around with things and figure out what makes the best sense for you. But you kind of have an idea now of why you might want to pick specific abilities with specific weapon types because of the way that they interact with weapon speed, the way they interact with feeding Breath of Sindragosa, or the way they interact with empowering your Obliterate, or the way they interact with getting more Frostwell's Indignation, which is the Azerite trait, which we will talk about in just a minute. Now, going back to my two-hand Frost DK PvP build, let's talk a little bit about honor talents. So the honor talents that I'm pretty much always running is a mixture of Heartstop, Chill Streak, and Necro Aura. These are very important. Oh, and Dome of the Ancient Shadow. These are your main go-to abilities. They're all extremely powerful, and they're all very useful abilities. Dome of the Ancient Shadow is a new PvP talent that is coming in the Shadowlands Pre-patch, and it makes our anti-magic zone absorb an additional 60% of magic damage. This is huge because without it, it's only 20%, and with it, it is now 80%. This is almost a necessity that you take almost all of the time unless you're going up against a team or class that has no magic damage. Chill Streak is in another similar situation where you take it a lot of the time. You want to take Chill Streak anytime you're going up against a melee cleave, anytime you're going up against a class that has access to lots of pets, because you can Chill Streak off of pets, you can Chill Streak off of guardians, off of elementals, anything that is a NPC that's standing beside the enemy. The only time you don't want to take Chill Streak is if you're facing something like a warrior or a ret paladin or a rogue where there's nothing to really Chill Streak off of. Now, Chill Streak does do true damage, and that's pretty cool. That means that snowball, even if you only get it to hit one time and it doesn't bounce, that snowball does quite a bit of damage. So there is an argument for taking it even against classes that you don't necessarily have an opportunity to make it bounce off of. But in general, Chill Streak, what its strength is to get lots of enemies clumped together and then just let it bounce between them the full 9 times. It will absolutely erase an enemy team like nothing. So very fun ability, and I highly recommend you use it. As for our other spot, then this is usually where I'll put in generally Heartstop Aura, because it's just so powerful. It really is very powerful to run, especially in duels. But Necro Aura is really great to take in arenas or any situation where you're surrounded by a lot of spellcasters and you really want to amplify them. Transfusion is a wonderful option to take. However, you do got to be careful if you add Transfusion into your build, and if you want to learn more about dueling as a Frost DK, more like a PvP centric guide, then I have that linked up in the corner of the video. I also have it down in the description down below. But Transfusion is great to run for more healing power. However, you do have to watch out because you have so many defensive abilities at your disposal at that point that you can run the risk of trying to use them all and you just never really give yourself a chance to do damage. It may sound a little weird, but trust me, it happens a lot. It happened to me, and it took one of my friends to point out, you're doing this all wrong. You're going too defensive. You got to go more offensive in this. And once I got rid of my Transfusion and I stopped running it versus most matchups, I ended up performing a lot better in duels and in PvP. So make sure you keep that in mind, and don't ever forget about Dark Simulacrum, which is amazing for being able to steal your enemies' spells and use them against them, like Blink, Polymorph, Bubble, Bop. Any of these abilities, Lay on Hands, they're all stealable. So if you're good enough to know when your enemy is about to cast something, and that is something that you feel pretty strongly you're capable of pulling off, then Dark Simulacrum is going to be your best friend. Now that we've gotten the talent builds out of the way, which was a huge section, let's go ahead and talk about Azerite traits. So yes, there are still Azerite traits in the Shadowlands pre-patch. The only system from BFA that will not be in the pre-patch are corruptions. And I know, big sad, we all wish it was all just gone, but it's not. So we still have Azerite traits, and our best traits are still going to be Frostwhelp's Indignation, which makes our Pillar of Frost summon a couple of Frostwhelps that breathe ice on our enemies and does a lot of damage, and it's one of the reasons why Icecap is so powerful in BFA. We also want to be running Icy Citadel, which makes our Pillar of Frost expires. When our Pillar of Frost expires, your strength is increased by 75 for 6 seconds. This effect lasts 2 seconds longer for each Obliterate and Frost type critical strike during Pillar of Frost. This means that when Pillar of Frost ends, we are not losing all of our damage when it does. This allows for a much more consistent pressure, and once again plays into why Icecap is such a viable option in the pre-patch. Now let's talk a little bit about our essences, another system that I know a lot of you were hoping would be going away, but is not gone just yet. You definitely want to run Blood of the Enemy as your main. This is in all forms of content, PvP, PvE, all of it. You want to be running Blood of the Enemy. It's absolutely massive. Makes a huge difference for our burst. It makes a huge difference for having more crits, which once again reduces the cooldown even more in Icecap if you're running that build. Once again, gives you even more strength if you're running Icy Citadel. Outside of that, you want to be running Essence of the Focusing Iris, especially for you two-hand Frost DKs. Haste is a very powerful stat for us, and we'll be getting into our stat priorities in just a moment. And then Breath of the Dying is insanely powerful. It does a tremendous amount of damage, especially during the execute window on your enemy, and it will help you secure kills. Then finally, Memory of Lucid Dreams. I know mine's only rank 1. You boys had it rough in BFA. It's not been a fun time, okay? But Memory of Lucid Dreams is extremely powerful for us Death Knights, and you absolutely have to be running this one. It's a fairly easy one to get. You just have to do a little bit of the campaign in Nazjatar to get it. Same thing with the Breath of a Dying. If you just do the intro questline campaign to the 8.3 stuff with Rathian and the visions and all that junk, then you will get your Breath of a Dying. The Essence of the Focusing Iris will be unobtainable. You have to get it from Mythic Plus dungeons, which we no longer have access to. And Blood of the Enemy, it requires you to do a whole lot of stuff. I think it's just beat like a rated battle. It's like Battlegrounds and PvP, Island PvP, yeah. So maybe you can still get this, but I don't know how many people will actually be willing to do that, especially like the island stuff. So you'll have to see if that's something that makes sense for you to be able to get. And yeah. As for our stat priority, as a two-hand Frost DK, you're going to want to run Haste over Verse, which I know my build is not that, but it's because I was a dual wield Frost DK in the last patch of BFA, and so all of my gear was Mastery and Verse. So I'm running kind of the wrong stat priority here. Be better than me, run Haste and Versatility, and then for your dual wield Frost DKs, you're going to want to run Mastery Versatility for PvP and Mastery and Crit for PvE. Now it's time for me to show you how to burst on your Frost DK. So I'm going to be coming at this from a two-handed Frost DK point of view. However, the burst sequence is pretty much identical regardless of which weapon style you play. So don't worry about it. This is the exact same thing you're going to be doing. You just might have Breath Sindragosa, for example, in here rather than what I'm using. So what you do always is you open up with your Obliterate and you spend that that Rhyme proc, you Obliterate, get some Frost Strikes out, you Obliterate. All right, this is just our regular rotation. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop my Remorseless Winter, go into a Pillar of Frost, pop my Blood of the Enemy, pop my Frost Whelps, and I'm going to weave my Frost Strikes and my Obliterates to get the maximum amount of Killing Machine procs out of my Obliteration talent. What it does is it makes Howling Blast and Frost Strike guaranteed to give you a Killing Machine proc, so you weave those until you are done, spend those procs as fast as you can, and that gives you your ultimate burst. I'm going to go ahead and dump a little bit of my runic power because I was sitting right at 100 that whole time. It's not ideal, but it would be better to just waste the runic power than it would be to get the rhythm all off and waste a possible Killing Machine proc. So that's pretty much the burst sequence. Now, if you're playing in PvP and you want to get that chill streak off, then you would pretty much do all that. But right after I used my Blood of the Enemy, which I have macroed into my Empower Rune weapon, and all that, once you have your Pillar of Frost going, then probably before you would even Frostborn's Fury, you would go ahead and chop your chill streak into it. That's when you would want to insert that in there. As for your Ghoul, since we can't sacrifice it, your Ghoul is also pretty much a burst ability, and you want to go ahead and just pull that out at the beginning of a fight and pretty much use it on cooldown, honestly. But you can also pair it with your burst to go ahead and just get a little bit more pressure. So just to recap, the first thing you do is you pop your Empower Rune weapon, then you go into your Pillar of Frost, then you go into your Blood of the Enemy if it's not already macroed into your Empower Rune weapon, then you go into your Chill Streak, and then you go into your Frostborn's Fury, and you top it all off with using your Raised Dead either before the burst or way before the burst or earlier in the match altogether. And don't forget that while your Pillar of Frost is active, I'll go ahead and pop it here, you want to Frost Strike, Killing Machine proc, which is Obliterate. Frost Strike, Obliterate. Frost Strike, Obliterate. Howling Blast also gives you an Obliterate. Use those procs fast you can. Howling Blast comes back up, another Obliterate proc. That's very important. You have to weave. If you're not weaving, then you're not going to get any bonus out of your Obliteration talent. If you're running Glacial Advance, then you're also going to want to make sure that you get that Glacial Advance to 5 stacks before you do a full burst. You may want to do a light burst where you only use 1 or 2 abilities in the beginning while you're building up those stacks, but you really want to wait until you get all 5 stacks of that Razor Ice on your enemy using your Glacial Advance before you go completely ham. Now let's talk a little bit about how to heal ourselves on a Frost DK. So our number one way of healing ourselves is our Lichborn. Lichborn is very important. I mentioned it earlier before, and so when it comes to healing ourselves, it is very important to use your Lichborn correctly. It is our most important healing cooldown, and using it correctly allows us to heal ourselves easily for our entire health bar. So the way you do that is, first of all, you use a macro. Sorry, I just bumped the microphone. Use a macro called right here, boom. Hashtag show tooltip Lichborn / cast sequence reset equals 20 ! Lichborn. And I will have this linked in the description down below, do not worry. But ultimately what this macro does is it will cast your Lichborn, and by pushing the button numerous times afterwards, it will cast your Death's Coil on you. Not on anybody else, on you. This simplifies the entire process, and it will even put in your hypothermic presence so that you can get the most death coils you possibly can during that Lichborn window. Another thing to understand about Lichborn healing is that it goes further than just getting death coils. So we find Lichborn in here, which it is somewhere. So if we look at Lichborn, we'll actually see that it will increase your leech by 10% for its duration. This is huge. This means that while Lichborn is active, you want to keep your offensive pressure high. What that means is I highly suggest that you combine your Lichborn to some degree with a burst cooldown. something that increases your strength. And that's another thing. So if we click on this guy over here, so if we look over at our death coil right here, it says causes it to heal an undead ally for 2048 health. What happens when I use my Pillar of Frost? 2660 health. Now, what do you think would happen if I had my Pillar of Frost, my Strength Trinket, and my Fallen Crusader proc, which gives me 15% strength all at the same time? It gives you a ton of healing back, and this means that your Lichborn is best used when paired with your Pillar of Frost, with your Trinket, and or with your Fallen Crusader proc. You want to get at least one of those in your Lichborn window. It is very, very, very important. If you don't do this, then your Lichborn will flop like a dead fish. So make sure you pair it with one of those things in order to make sure you get the most healing that you can possibly get. Now, outside of Lichborn, it's important to remember our new ability, Anti-Magic Zone. Well, new, it's our returning ability. This is extremely powerful ability. It's baseline now. You just drop it like that. As far as a macro for that, I have at cursor Anti-Magic Zone, so I don't have to select on the ground. This will also be in a Word document down below with all of my macros linked in it. Same thing goes for our newly returned ability, Death and Decay. This one is used in PvP for getting rogues out of stealth and other stealthy classes out of stealth. This is basically a useless ability. Otherwise, it does no damage, but it is extremely powerful and extremely useful, and I'm super glad that we have it back, because getting rogues out of stealth, getting hunters out of stealth, getting mages out of stealth, getting druids out of stealth, you get the idea. It's very powerful, very useful. Outside of these abilities, we have our, of course, Death Pact. We have our damage mitigation abilities, Anti-Magic Shell for stopping magic damage and CC, and our Icebound Fortitude for stopping physical damage and physical-based CCs like stuns. And yeah, that's pretty much our defensive abilities. They're wonderful. Make sure you use them. Make sure you use them. So for our other active healing ability, we have Death Strike, and Death Strike did get nerfed in the Shadowlands Pre-patch. So Death Strike gets nerfed in PvP. So in PvP, Death Strike will only heal you for 5% of your maximum health, not 10% like it says in the tooltip, as only during PvE combat. So Death Strike's not as powerful as it used to be. It hits like a wet noodle and it heals like a wet noodle. However, Death Strike is still our only active way to heal ourselves, and so it's important that you do use this properly. I want to suggest not using it too often either. It does very little damage, and in a duel where you use too many Death Strikes, what you'll see is you're just never going to be able to do enough damage to counteract your enemy's passive healing. People have a lot of passive healing in this pre-patch, and Death Strike's not going to cut it damage-wise to get through that, so you're going to have to weigh and you're going to have to decide when do you need to be pushing for offensive pressure, when do you need to be pushing for more defensive and healing. And that is going to come down to experience, and it's not something I can really convey to you in any reasonable amount of time in a YouTube video. But trust me, think about it, focus on it, and try out different things, and you'll figure it out, and you'll do just fine. And that is exactly how you play your Frost DK. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more Frost DK content like this, and don't forget to ring that bell notification so you get notified when I upload a video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.